Hey there, it's Pete with GCI Turf. Hope you're doing well. And just want to talk to you for a minute about something that is incredibly important in a yard. If you're trying to grow a high-end, highly maintained fescue, there's something that really has to be done at a minimum of once a year. Minimum. Soil test. I actually soil test my yard twice a year. I want to answer 3 questions that I've been asked about soil testing. Number 1, what is soil testing? Number 2, when should I do a soil test? And number 3, how do I do a soil test? So to start, number 1, what is a soil test? Well, it's basically a measurement. It's a measurement of what nutrients are in the ground at any given point in time during the course of a year. You could take a soil test in January and get a result back, and then you could take a soil test in April and get a different result back. Nutrients and things fluctuate in the ground from time to time. That's why it's important to do a consistent soil test, meaning do it often. That's the whole reason I do my yard twice a year. So, when should you do a soil test? Well, for me personally, I soil test my yard in January and then again in June. The reason I do it that way is if I soil test in January, when it comes back, the test comes back and tells me that, hey, you're low in phosphorus, or you're low in potassium, or you're low in this or that, or the pH is off. Big deal. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then that gives me time to get the nutrients, get them put on the ground just in time for spring. Because with fescue, our 2 most important times of the year are spring of the year, when it wakes up and it's taken off and it's really vigorous and active. And then the other important time is during aerating and seeding. That's why I do the second soil test in June. I also want to throw a 4th question in here. Why should I soil test? Man, those UPS guys rock it out this time of year, don't they? Why should I soil test? Me, John, Jack, Jill, there's no way of actually looking into the ground and telling you what nutrients are present, what's there, what's not there. So that is the reason you should. That's the why. So that we know what it's lacking in and what it's not lacking in. The other reason is soil pH. All right, pH is a big deal. It's a very, very big deal. You have alkaline soils and acidic soils. All right, if a good dead neutral pH is around 6.5. We like to keep ours between 6 and 7, somewhere in that ballpark. The reason for that is if your yard is too alkaline or too acidic, if it's high or low, one way or the other, 8.5 or even down around the 6.5, if your number is too far away from the 6.5, the nutrients that are put down can't be taken in by the plant as well. Sure, you're going to get some benefit and some uptake of those nutrients, but for the most part, if your pH isn't neutral, then the grass can't take up the fertilizer as well. That's why it's so important to test for the pH when you do a soil test. And most of your basic soil tests will tell you what the pH is. We don't include lime in our yearly applications. This is the exact reason why we don't include lime. Because I don't know what your soil pH is. You don't know what your soil pH is. So until we find that out, we don't know if the yard actually needs lime or not. Example, let's say By adding lime, you raise the soil pH. If your soil pH is at a 5, you would add the right amount of lime to bump it up to a 6.5. In increments of about 1 point each time. Let's say, for instance, you have a pH of 6.5. Let's say your pH is good, but you're adamant, lime that yard, throw that lime to it. We go out, you go out, make a lime application. You just bumped your pH up to 7.5, depending on how much lime you put out. Now you've created a imbalanced pH simply by adding lime. And you did it probably because your grandmother's grandmother's grandmother used to do it, and it's just what we put on the yard. Well, I view that differently, because if the pH doesn't need to be adjusted, then we don't put out the lime. It's that simple. So I'm going to take my probe and kind of walk around the yard in random points. I'm going to stick the probe down in the ground and pull out around anywhere from 4, 5, 6 inch core, and that'll give me what I want to work with as far as soil. And I'm going to do this around 10 to 15 times roughly per soil test that I want to do. And if I was going to do the front yard, I would do that 10 to 15 times in the front, and then if I wanted a different soil test for the back, I would repeat that process for the backyard. But in my case, one soil test is sufficient for me for the entire property. So I would do this 10 or 15 times, and this would give me enough dirt to send in for the lab to be able to test it. And what I'm going to do is remove about this first 1 inch that goes back up toward the grass. That way I'm only left, see that little piece of grass in there? You got to get that kind of stuff out. I'm only left with dirt. That's all I want. I don't want to send a bunch of roots from the root zone of the plant. I don't want to send little pieces of grass, and because we're not measuring, we're not trying to figure out what's in the roots or what's in the grass. We're doing a soil test, so we want to know what's in dirt, and so that's why you send dirt alone. Plus, your organic matter reading will be off if you send a sample that has a lot of roots in it, maybe a lot of compost in there, any type of organic matter. I'm not real concerned about the organic matter right below the thatch layer. I'm more concerned about how much organic matter I have in this actual plug. And by looking at it, you can look at that dirt. Look how deep, 4 inches down, I've got good dark soil. After you get about 10 to 15 of these 3-inch cores from your yard, now it's time to process it so that you can actually bag it up and send it off. Okay, so once you've removed all the cores that you're going to take, and we take off the top of the core, which houses most of the roots and the actual grass and leaf tissue, and then you remove a touch of the bottom, you're left with this. And so now we have a whole bucket full of it, and it's time I call it processing it. So I've let this sit for about 2 days in open air, and then now please excuse my tools here at the shop. I have a much more sophisticated way of processing soil tests that we take on clients' yards, but I'm here at the house and this is all I could find. So what I want to do is chop this up like this. So what you're going to be left with is something like this. Kind of chopped up and fine. Now you can see I've still got some of these roots in here And what I'm gonna do is go through this and kind of sift out any of these little roots I can get. So it's kind of tedious. It takes a little while to do it because the whole point of this is to get an accurate measurement, and I don't want any variables in this to make my measurement inaccurate. So that's why I'll take the time and go through it. So it's kind of time consuming to do it this way. So who do you use for soil testing? To me, that's a big deal. And what I mean by that is you can use the state service, meaning you can go to southern states, you can get their bag, you can fill out the form, go do a soil test, send it off to them. They're going to give you something that is, first of all, it's free. That's a bonus to it. It doesn't cost you a dime to do it other than your time. But for me, I don't get enough information off of that soil test from the state version or the free version that's going to satisfy me. So I choose to use a lab that specializes in turf grass. That's the difference. It costs money to do it that way. I mean, they're not super duper expensive. They're not cheap, but they're not super expensive. And if we're doing it for a client, by the time we add our labor to drive out to your yard and go through the process of pulling the plugs, bring it back to the shop, let it dry out, process it, chop it up, bag it up, take it to the post office, you get a lot of labor involved in that. So that's why we charge what we charge for a soil test. It's just simply more to it than just going and getting some dirt and send it off. But the lab that we use has a certified turf grass scientist and a agronomist. So they know how dirt relates to soil, and how turf relates to dirt, and how dirt relates to turf. So their reports are incredibly easy to read, and when we get them back, if it's a pretty cut and dried soil test, I'll take it upon myself to go ahead and make the recommendation to the client and perform that task. If it's something that looks a little fishy to me, I have the option of calling these people and talking with the turf grass scientist, who can steer me in the correct direction in the things I may or may not quite understand about the soil test, and I can apply that to the customer's yard. Now, in our application process, and this is a big deal, especially with our clients, because I've noticed in the past that a lot of our clients get the notion that we do a soil test, they pay us to do the soil test, we go out, we get the results, and when we come back, we say, okay, we need to do this, this, and this, and this is what it costs to do this. And I've had clients in the past say, oh, well, I'm already paying you to fertilize my yard. Why do we have to pay to do extra fertilizer? It's the fertilization program that we do on a client's yard is a maintenance rate program, meaning the plant, when I say the plant, I mean the tall fescue, it requires a certain amount of nutrients per year or per month or per day, or whatever, however you want to break it down. And we give that and supply that in our lawn care program. Okay, let's say your soil started off at a less than desirable status, for lack of better words. Well, we're supplying the plant what it needs. That doesn't necessarily mean the soil is up to par, because we're talking about two different things. We're talking about a turf grass plant, and then we're talking about dirt. That's two separate deals going on. So you can have poor soil, and the soil will just be bad, and you're putting in fertilizers on a routine basis, but the grass look good. That can be possible. I've seen soil tests 100 times over that this turf looks incredible, and we do a soil test and it's like, yeah, gosh, that is pathetic dirt. So the proof's right there in the pudding. So in order to get that soil up to par, that's why it has to have an additional applications, or maybe one application or several applications of phosphorus or potassium or whatever it needs to get the soil up to par, up to speed, to give you a good soil. And then the maintenance part kind of takes care of the grass. Now the grass is obviously going to use those nutrients that go in the ground from the soil test as well. And a lot of the times, that's why after you do a soil test, you recommend this to a client. They say, go for it. You go out, apply those products, and then all of a sudden the yard just goes boom and just explodes. We see that every single year. Well, it's now you have a good, healthy, thriving soil that has the nutrients it was lacking before, plus you're on your maintenance program for your fertilizer, for your turf grass. So, when those two things gel together, it makes for an incredible turf grass. That's the reason, or one of the reasons, I soil test my yard 2 times a year, because I want to always keep the nutrient level in my soil up to speed and up to par. So that's kind of my take on it. Kind of a more of a relaxed opinion about the soil testing part. So talking about soil pH, man, that's so important. It's you can soil test the ground to death, and you can soil test it every year, and if 10 times a year. But if you don't, and if you get a result back or a test back that is a low or high pH. Remember we talked about 6.5 being optimal. Between 6 and 7, I'm good with that, somewhere in that ballpark. But if you come back with a soil test that is entirely too low or entirely too high, you can do that 100 times over, and nothing's going to happen until you change that. Meaning you have to add lime if it's too low, or you can do other things if it's too high. Rarely do I see one that's too high. Majority of the time they're too low. And that is so incredibly important because, as I said earlier, if you don't add that lime based on the recommendation of the soil test, then your turf or your garden or your plants or whatever it is you're trying to grow cannot effectively take in the nutrients in the same way that it would if your pH is at neutral, if the pH is good. Here's a real good example of how to break that down and maybe help you understand that a little bit better. Let's pretend these gummy bears is fertilizer, phosphorus and potassium. These gummy bears represent phosphorus and potassium. Leah represents the turf grass, okay? The Jeep represents the dirt, the soil. So I'm gonna take the fertilizer and I'm gonna lay it right there. I'm gonna shut the door, I'm gonna lock it. Hey, turf grass Leah, go in there and get your fertilizer.
I can't, it's locked.
It's locked. Well, it's locked up because the pH of the soil isn't right. The grass can't use the fertilizer that's there in the ground that God put in the ground because the pH isn't right. So I've got we get the soil test, and then here is your lime. Okay, this is a lime application based off what the soil test told us to do. We apply the lime. Now the turf grass can get the fertilizer.
And eat it.
And eat it, yes. Now you wonder why. This goes back to the old saying, fertilizing lime in the spring or whatever, or just lime in the spring or whatever. Grandpa said put lime out, and he always got a good color response from lime. Well, the reason for that is Grandpa's soil pH was probably low, more than likely, and so when he put the lime out, the lime got activated in the ground. It released those nutrients that are already in the ground to the plant. And then the plant showed off. The grass showed off. It started blossoming or growing or whatever. That's because the lime didn't actually turn it green. The lime released those nutrients by getting the pH correct in the ground. Okay, so what's another way? We now know that lime, if you have a low pH, by adding the recommended amount of lime per soil test, will help to unlock nutrients and make nutrients more available and help the grass take in fertilizers and nutrients more effectively. What's some other things you can do? Well, humic acid is a big one in that. Humic acid is incredibly good at unlocking things in the soil. That's why we use so much of it. Our turf grass program, we do 7 applications, 4 of which are liquid. All 4 of those have full rates of humic acid. If our fungicide plan is 4 applications, so those yards are going to have 11 applications total, and the 4 fungicides are liquid. So that means those yards actually get 8 applications of humic acid throughout the year, and that's year after year after year after year. We've been using humic for, oh gosh, whenever it first started becoming popular in lawn care, 6 or 7, 8 years ago maybe. So a lot of these yards we maintain have gotten an incredible amount of humic acid over the years. Now, my view on humic acid is this, in a nutshell. It is an exceptional tool to have in your toolbox. That's my view on humic. To me, it's not the end all be all. It just isn't. We use a lot of it, simply for that reason alone, if for no other reason, because it helps to unlock nutrients. Now, if you were going to apply humic once a month and do a soil test once a month, you could probably go in and analyze those soil tests and do some simple math and figure out how much phosphorus or how much potassium or how much of this or how much of that is actually being unlocked. But that's a lot of work and a lot of money spent on soil tests. A lot of wasted time, in my opinion. I don't have that kind of time. Maybe you do, but I don't. So what I'm getting at is, to my knowledge, I don't really know that there is a test or a process that can be done to tell me exactly how much phosphorus or potassium or whatever is actually being unlocked from the humic acid use. So therefore, that's why I call it a tool in the toolbox. Now, if somebody's got a better idea and knows a way to find out how much nutrients are actually being unlocked per application of humic, I'm very open to that and more than willing to listen. You learn by listening. But I've researched it 1,000,000 times, and I don't know that there's anything out there. So But humic acid is incredible. My gosh, it is so incredible. It's a great product. We use it in granular form, which is humate. It all comes from liordinite and liordinite, and it's just awesome stuff, man. I'm telling you, we love it. So I hope this has been helpful. And again, you see, there's lots of things everywhere about soil testing, and everybody has their own take on it. And some, like my buddy Matt, is going to give you a highly scientific, detailed explanation of it. And I kind of like to do the more bare bones, break it down explanation. So this is my take on soil testing, why it's important, why you should do it, how you do it, the whole 9 yards. So I hope this has been informative to you, and I'm going to package this up now. This will go in a little soil sample bag about 4 inches tall, maybe 5 inches, and I'll send that off. And I've also got an irrigation water sample. This company I deal with also will test your water specifically to see if it's good for irrigation water, even down to the specific type of turf grass you have. That's what I mean by a state soil test versus a or a lab or a customized private lab, is they can get incredibly detailed with this stuff. And that's me. I'm a super detailed person. I'm very finicky when it comes to this. I'm very perfectionist oriented when it comes to this kind of stuff. And so that's why I'm willing to pay more money for that type of soil test versus the free state one. So when I get the results back on my dirt, this come out of my yard. I've also got one for the garden, and then I'm sending the water sample off. And when I get that back, we'll go over that in a video and read it, and I'll show you where I'm low and where I'm high and all that kind of cool stuff, and we'll talk about that then. So check you later. Thank you for watching.